Recording to the cloud. All
Okay.
right. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for this installment of online poetry. And I'd like to thank Brian Cullhane specifically for being here. I'm going to read a quick bio about him and then pass it off to John. So Brian Cullhane's poetry has appeared widely in such journals as the New York Republic, the Hudson Review, the Paris Review, and Plume. He has been awarded the Poetry Foundation's Emily Dickinson First Book Prize for The King's Question, published by Grey Wolf Press. Remembering Leith is his second poetry collection. A recipient of fellowships from MacDowell, the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, and the Artist Trust / Washington State's Art Commission, he has also featured on Frost and Thoreau for Humanities Washington. The son of a legendary Disney animator, he was born and raised in New York City. He attended the City University of New York for his bachelor's, Columbia University's writing program for his MFA, and the University of Washington for his PhD, where he studied epic literature and history criticism. For many years, he taught film studies and English literature at Lakeside School in Seattle, Washington. Now retired, he and his wife divide their time between their homes in Seattle and New York's Catskills. That's nice. It's lovely in the Catskills. Welcome. So I'm going to pass this off to John, and I hope you guys have a lovely time.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Tess, and thanks, Wendy, and the library for hosting it. So, Brian, I didn't hear the last name. So the other place besides Seattle is where?
The Catskills in New York.
Oh, the Catskills. Oh, yeah, the Catskills. You're, yeah. Yeah, we used to live in Stockbridge, Mass for 6 years. So, and at one time, our daughter, son, and son-in-law lived in Rochester. So we'd make the trek from the Mass Pike all the way over through New York into the, Rochester. So, yeah.
Well, it's an amazing area in terms of natural beauty. And my wife and I went across country, and you're looking at all these incredible landscapes. And I think we were both most impressed by the part north of the Catskills in New York State when we just drove down these amazingly gorgeous, this amazing route. Looked out over various mountains, and it was just incredible that it was right there in our backyard, and we'd never gone north of the Catskills, and there it was. Yeah, there's a lesson in there somewhere.
Yeah. There's a poem laying in there.
Exactly.
Yeah, our neighbors from Cranford sold their house at one point when they retired, and they moved to the town a little bit north of Woodstock. So we would go up there every once in a while. I don't know if that's
So that is in the area.
Yeah. It's a different world up there. It's all of a sudden you just feels like you cross a line, and then you can't figure out what state you're in. So let's start out like we always do. What does inquiry mean for you?
Well, I've been thinking about this since it's the theme of your reading series. And my mind has turned to beginnings and endings. What do we think about origins as a people? What do we think of endings, theologically and otherwise? There are, words for these things. Study of origins is actually kind of medical. So it's etiology. How did you get this disease? What's the origin of it? But it's also, how did we come here as a people? And that's kind of a branch of ethnology, where, the study of various peoples' stories about where did they arrive? How did they arrive here? How did this volcano get here? If you're in Mount Rainier's shadow, as we are here in Seattle, how did the world form? So those are, huge questions, and they're bookended by the study of ends, which is eschatology, which is a theological, study of kind of the history of people's thinking about what is life after death, if there is such a thing, or how does the world end? And now there are various scientific ideas, and people go around thinking of global warming and what is life going to be like when the glaciers have melted. But beyond that, You know, what our one of our greatest questions is, what is the nature of death? Our own death in
Yeah.
particular, right? But also, if you think about, you know, the Bible has both of those issues in Genesis. So we have the origin of humanity
Yeah.
with the story of Adam and Eve, and they're questioning or questing toward knowledge, right? Eve is told that she will be like a god if she eats the apple, and the sense is that she will suddenly have a knowledge of good and evil that she doesn't have before. But in that sense of completion, when she eats the apple, she realizes that there was a good reason for the prohibition. In particular, when God comes down and says, now you've, you know, broken my trust and you're going to experience death. You're going to experience work, and you're going to experience illness and pain in childbirth. All of these things that make us human suddenly are the result of the quest for knowledge. So the idea that inquiry is both fundamental to humanity, you know, as soon as a child is born, I remember my son Will following in his footsteps as he was a toddler, and he discovered his shadow. And I think we spent about 90 minutes or 2 hours as he walked around our entire block following his shadow and just seeing how it worked, right? So that's you know, a small instance of our desire for knowledge, but it's indicative of sort of a craving that humans have. But as the Bible suggests, there's also that danger, right? We have that today with artificial intelligence. What genie have we unlocked when kids, and, you know, I'm a teacher or retired teacher, when they can, you know, plug in a rather complex question and suddenly, you know, there's an entire essay that would take scholars to parse and figure out whether or not a human wrote it, right? So anyway, that's a kind of a teacherly answer to the question, but that's where my mind is at right now.
Yeah, just to play off that, I'm just wondering nowadays, are people really seeking knowledge, or are they just trying to grab information? I mean, I read a bunch of newspapers every day, and my wife is always chiding me like what's news, you know? Some of it is just it's repeated paper to paper, but you know, I'm just wondering if, you know, that knowledge quest
Yeah.
is kind of, you know, fade away because there's so much data, there's so much information coming at us. We don't have to do an inquiry; it's just served up on a plate.
No, it's the paradox of Google, right?
Yeah.
We're presented with all the possibilities of data, but how to string it together. There's a wonderful story that I believe Richard Feynman talks about, sort of the understanding of physics, and he relates it to this this myth or legend of you know, these Mayan astronomers, right, are looking up at the stars, and they are studying it over the course of a year. And they go to the Mayan king and they go, well, you know, if you take a bean and put it in a bowl, after 365 beans, the stars will be the same as they are right now in the sky. And the king says, what do beans have to do with stars?
Oh boy.
So,
Oh boy.
you know, it's that great moment of Feynman's point is, you know, we've got the beans, we've counted the 365 and we see the correlation, but, you know, what exactly do we know about physics? Can we explain it, you know, general truths with physics? And right now we can't. So that, I think that's the dichotomy between data and knowledge is what you're getting at.
Yeah, and you know, for your work, you know, some people start poems with a question, other people start with a question, another question appears. So how does that kind of play and a lot of people say, well, it could be 4 different versions of whatever is going to happen based on where they are. I just didn't know if you had one way that you started off, if you were
Are you
starting
talking
off.
about writing?
Yeah, writing. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't usually start out with a question. I usually start out with a sound, the sound of a first line.
Hmm.
Mandelstam told his wife, he said, and she came in and started talking to him. He said, "Can't you see I'm composing?" And she said, "No, I can't see that." He said, "It's in my head. It's the hum. You can't hear that." So it's the sound of words, I think, more than the
Yeah.
sense, is how I begin with that first line. In fact, there's a instance of that with the last poem in my current book, which is it begins with the first line was the last to be written, and I got that line from an interview I was reading. The poet was talking about that question that you asked, and he said, the first line was the last to be written, and I thought that has 10 syllables in it, the sound of it. So I wrote a poem based on that as the first line. I'm happy to read it. But.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, that'd be great to just dive in and read some things for us.
Okay. I mean, instead of all this blather about beginnings.
No, I like the blather is the that's like the mustard on the hot dog. I don't know what it is. It's an essential ingredient to the meal.
I don't think I've ever been compared to a hot dog before.
No.
But,
That's just my crude. That's my. No, I'm
okay.
taking some guys on a beer tour today to Augusta, Maine. We're going to a brewery, so it'll be more of a pizza tour. But
okay.
Yeah.
The first line was the last to be written. The first line was the last to be written. Ash in the fireplace, first to be stirred. Apples in the bowl, last to be bitten. Waters in the mountains, first to be heard. The first line was the last to be written. Frost lay white on the wintering herd. The first wool made the last child's mitten. The last pen wrote, the purring cat purred. On the open page, the last word written. Next to the lamp, the opening word. Last season's apples yet to be bitten. Far from the tumult, first to be heard. The last page was the first to be written. Waters in the mountains, oh, very cold. Ash in the fireplace, wool under kitten. On the open page, the last word is told. The first line was the last to be given. Ash in the fireplace, first to be stirred. Peace in the capital, last to be riven. On the open page, the purring cat purred.
Wow.
That was one of those few poems that kind of totally surprised the poet, and I wrote the whole thing out, boom, and really didn't change anything. And that doesn't happen often in a poet's life, I don't think.
So how long was it between you reading that interview and writing the poem?
That night, I read it in the afternoon over lunch, and when I sat down, it was at the McDowell Colony, and I went back to my studio and picked up the interview again and looked at it and realized that line had a resonance to it, and that's how I started.
Nice.
And the rhymes, of course, help, and the repetitions help.
Yeah.
So I have that structure sort of to build on.
And is that, once again, I think everyone has a combination of styles. Is that a style that has worked for you in other ways? All of a sudden you're reacting to something and then.
Yeah, actually, I find a lot of poetry to be good starters, where I'll read a poem and something in it, a word or a metaphor or a tone even, sparks something. Yeah, sometimes it's the same poet. I'll be reading a certain poet over the course of a month, and keep on finding things in him or her work that I'm responding to. Often it'll be history. I'm fascinated by history, so
Yeah.
particularly ancient history.
Yeah.
I have a poem about ancient history that you might find
Absolutely. Read anything you like.
apropos. It's in well, I have a bunch of poems about it, but okay. Hold on a sec. Oh, there it is. So this is from my first book called The King's Question.
Yeah.
Published about 13, 14 years ago. And bear with me here for a sec. Look at the table of contents. So this was sparked by it's actually a title poem, and it was sparked by, it's called The King's Question. It was sparked by a historian, the ancient historian Herodotus, who wrote about, it's a very ironic story about, and it's legendary, right? I mean, there's no proof that this actually occurred outside of Herodotus, but this king Croesus, who was fabulously wealthy, wanted to find out from the oracles whether or not it was propitious for him to embark on a war. And the famous answer came back from Delphi that, if you do, a great kingdom will fall. And of course, he proceeds to prosecute the war and loses, and it's his great kingdom that falls, right?
Yeah.
So be careful what you ask, right, or interpret. But anyway, I thought about that story, and he actually asks three different priests or priestesses rather, for this oracular knowledge, and kind of tests them, and we have this famous answer, but I was thinking, well, maybe there were other questions that he asked, which Herodotus doesn't follow up, right? So that's the basis of the poem.
Great, fantastic.
And before he put his important question to the oracle, Croesus planned to test all the famous soothsayers, sending runners half around the world to Delphi, Dodona, Ampharius, Brachydiae, and Ammon, so as to determine the accuracy of their words. His challenge, not to say anything of his future, but rather what he was doing in his capital, Sardis, eating an unlikely meal of lamb and tortoise, exactly 100 days after messengers had set out. So he's eating this, 100 days after he sent these messengers to the soothsayers, right? This posed a challenge then of far space, not of time, of seeing past dunes and rock fortresses, of flying freighted above caravans and seas, of sightedness, as it were, in the present, construed as a darkened room. Croesus of Lydia sought by this means to gauge the unplumbed limits of what each oracle knew, hesitant to entrust his fate to any unable to divine lamb and tortoise stewing in a bronze pot. When only the Pythia of Apollo at Delphi correctly answered from her cleft, her tripod just the lens for seeing into the royal ego, she put his mind to rest, but not before speaking in her smoke-stung voice. I count the grains of sand on the beach and the sea's depth. I know the speech of the dumb and hear those without voice. We know this because those present wrote it down. Of the king's crucial question, however, there is nothing. We have no word. The histories are silent. My analyst, whose office on Madison was narrow as an anchorite's cave, would sit behind me as I stared up at her impassive ceiling as the uptown buses slushed all the way to Harlem, and I would recount with many hesitations and asides the play that I was starring in, whose acts were as yet fluid, though the whole loomed tragically enough. She would listen, bent over knitting, or occasionally note some fact made less random by my tremulous soliloquy. When much later I heard of her death after long cancer, I walked across town and stood in front of her building, trying to resurrect those afternoons that became the years we labored together toward a time without neuroses, when I might work and raise a family and find peace. Find, if not happiness exactly, some surcease from pain. What question had I failed to ask when the chance was mine, when she who knew me so well could have answered? Let just one of those quicksilver hours be returned to me with my knowledge now of the world and not a boy's, with all that I have become a lighted room. 1 hour to ask the question that burned once in a king's throat. The question of all questions, the true source and center, without which a soul must make do, clap hands, and sing.
Wow. Really, really great transition from the Oracle. Yeah, I was reading about the Oracle. She sat over this open pit or something,
Yeah,
and I felt like, I don't know, was that like a combination of methane gas and laughing? I don't know. There was like they
yeah,
talk about what that was, just I guess volcanic.
yeah. And they believe now that, I mean, this is a recent finding, relatively recent, that they believe that her trance was induced by the fumes
Yeah,
that were
yeah,
rising. But that's a scientific explanation, right? And the mythic might just as well be true.
yeah. And her answer about a kingdom will fall. I don't know if that's hallucinatory smoke. That sounds like it's pretty. Yeah, it's pretty. It's got a foundation on that one.
Well, it's one of those ironies that, you get what you ask for, right? You just don't know what it is that you've really asked for. The king thinks that he's asking whether it's going to be safe or not, right? Safe to attack. And it is safe for him after he's defeated, right? Because he's going to be dead. It's totally safe.
Yeah, maybe he asked the wrong question. Hey, am I going to win the war if I start it?
That would have been a better question, right?
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Yeah,
But
that's
the poem centers on this idea that if you just had one question to ask someone who knows you so well, but as a man, not as a young man, what would that question be? And of course, the irony is that the answer probably would be as baffling and gnomic as the oracle's was to the king.
yeah.
Right.
That's very interesting. We'll have to do like survey says, whatever that game was, and say, so, Brian, we take a little pause to let Kathy and I guess Victoria give us some comments or ask some questions. So we have a little break. Kathy, I know you're always good for something. So don't, as I say, don't let the poet off the hook.
Well, I'm fascinated with both of these poems so far, and I wonder if is form always the way that you go with poetry, or do you also write in a open form at all? And is there, if so, does this kind of historical subject matter lead you to form more often?
I can't answer the second question, but because I don't know. But the first one is really in kind of in one I can answer, and that is that I don't always write in form. If you mean stanzaic structures, metrical lines, interweaving of rhyme and rhyme schemes. My mind is drawn to that, but lately, in particular, I've been writing more free verse, and I think that trajectory is one that's fairly common to 20th and 21st century poets. This kind of, I wouldn't exactly call rhyme and meter shackles, but at least they are, ways of constraining the imagination, and breaking from that
Right.
is liberating. I actually wrote a recent poem about my own problems with memory, and as I grow older, sometimes the smallest words escape me, and I think it's a common problem in people in their 60s and 70s, and probably will end up babbling nonsense in my 80s. But anyway, I wrote this poem called Forgetting in free verse, and it's short enough I can read it right now if you're interested.
Yeah, go
that'd be
ahead.
great.
And it begins with this line: learning is hard, but forgetting harder. Retired now, I tend to miss calling the day by its right name. Then something, the radio or a school bus, corrects me, and a Thursday will come whirling into being, vivid as Thor's hammer. Yesterday, I think it was, I held metal in my hand. Spoon, I said aloud, half smiling to its averted face. You've come a long way in life when you stand barefoot on a cold kitchen floor, looking at a spoon for an answer. And that gets us back to your theme of inquiry, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we have the Oracle at Delphi. We have the spoon. Brian, we got a lot of options here for season 4 of poetry.
I have a follow-up comment.
Yeah.
John, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Come on.
Yeah. So I noticed that even in your free verse, you're controlled in the sense that it's short, concise poetry, and it's just interesting because I have found form helpful because I tend not to be concise unless I have constraints. So I think I'm still working between those areas, even though my tendency is to write free verse more often. But I wonder if you wrote form first, if you think that's helped you to maintain that conciseness.
Poetry is an art of compression, as you know.
Yes.
And concision is the handmaiden to such. But I think that sometimes those poets who write in free verse and write in longer lines, say, not always, unconstrained by rhyme or meter, are following, at least in America, Whitman.
Right.
And there's an essay I wrote, I wish I wrote, I read of James Joyce on the delicacy of Whitman, and those lines that seem could stretch out forever, they're actually really delicate, in all ways, tonally as well, and nuanced. And I'm thinking, in the very beginning of Song of Myself, a child comes forth and asks this question: what is the grass? right? John, that's, I guess, one of those ideological questions. What's the origin of this green stuff that I'm holding in my hands? And Whitman, as you know, beautifully, delicately proceeds to offer various metaphorical or analogical answers. One is it is the green out of green. It is the flag of my disposition out of green stuff woven. Right. That's one answer. Another is it is the beautiful hair of uncut graves. It's just and it goes on. Right. And I think the question there is, where do you stop as a free verse poet? With form, you sort of you kind of run out of energy, and entropy takes over, and that's when you stop, right? With a sonnet, of course, you end with the 14th line and that final rhyme. I mean, if it's a Shakespearean sonnet, it's the final couplet, right? Mm-hmm. Right. Which sort of gives you the terminus, which you're heading towards as a writer. And with Whitman, he wrote 52 parts, I think, of A Song of Myself, and so he probably could have stopped earlier, right? And it doesn't. He had no sense of how long this thing is that he's writing. Sort of like a novelist, I imagine.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Those are great questions.
Thanks.
John?
Victoria? I don't know if Victoria.
I don't think you could ask my wife questions.
So Victoria, back in 2012, we got the video. We want to know what he was doing. No, you're kidding. Yeah, I like a lot of humor, so.
I'm just here to monitor.
Oh boy. I think you and my wife went to the same school.
Exactly.
She was a hall monitor in high school.
Yeah, that's it. Oh boy, I think I still need a hall monitor. So, yeah, Brian, please, read us some more of your work.
Sure. I'd like to read a couple of poems that I've written in the past year or two.
Yeah, great, fantastic.
The last two, the only two books I've written have been sort of collections that, the first one was published in 2008 when I was in my 50s, and talk about a late starter. And but that was, the earliest poem in that collection was something I'd written in 2022 at the age of 22. So, and then this last collection, Remembering Lethe, and I hope to get a chance to read that poem, which is, I think, very much about knowledge and inquiry. That collection took 13 years to write. So I'm either a really slow writer or one that kind of is hampered by, the sense that a collection has to be the very best of my work, which means tossing a lot of stuff out.
Well, I think poetry has to sometimes age like wine. It has to matriculate, and you don't want to pop that cork too soon. You don't want to, so.
To break joy's grape against my palate fine.
There we go.
Okay, so this is a poem called Ricorso, and it's Italian for return. And it's actually, it's a well-known idea in Vico studies, the Italian philosopher, of kind of like, it's a precursor to Nietzschean eternal return, right? This idea that, we're bound to relive our lives again exactly the same way, and that's the greatest of all punishments, knowing what tomorrow is going to be like 10 years, so on and so forth, right? You can't avoid the huge mistakes you're going to make. So this is a poem I wrote at the height of the virus plague, and Ricorso, published in Literary Matters. Most of the time, I stand around all day, suck air, whistle breath, dress, lie down, wait for late arrivals, call out lost names. Most of the time, I stand around all day, sleepwalk bald streets of the blank town. Most of the time, I read page after page. Sometimes I get up, put the pen down, face the wall, outstare the clock again. Mostly, I mark the time in which to age. Stargaze the ceiling, eye the sullen town, sleepwalk as knowns become unknowns. Most of the time, I scribble with my pen, suck air, whistle breath, dress, lie down, wait for late arrivals who are late again. Like things that rise, often I fall down. Mostly, I mark the time in which to age, the wan clock on the wall, a lost name, the sleepwalking town, the broken day, get up, lie back down, scribble on the page. Mostly, I read the same books over again. This is life, circling around the sullen town, watching the clock, sitting around all day. There is sleepwalking, then the lying down, waiting for unknowns to become knowns, calling out lost names. Why? I couldn't say.
Wow.
So that, by the way, is it, Kathy? That was written, in fairly strict stanzas that were unrhymed. But that, the 5 lines and that little stanzaic room helped me create the poem. Here's a second poem that I wrote within the past couple of years called Paperweight. And somebody gave me a paperweight, which I actually have up on my bookcase, and it does not weigh down paper. It's just there because it's pretty. So paperweight, and this is also sort of a dark poem. Ricorso, in its kind of sense of twisting and turning and never getting anywhere, is also dark, right? Calling out lost names, being stuck in a room, looking at a clock. It's the poem about a plague, right? We're stuck in stasis. Paperweight, in contrast, is about a journey, but the journey takes the journeyer, who's on a train somewhere. The destination's not known or never revealed in the poem. It's not really important, because what is important is the going away from, and it's the going away from home. And why this person is going away from home is never really revealed, except in the last image. We can chat about that. If it comes to that, I suppose I could see taking a train to the limit of a night's ride, uncomfortable, sitting up all hours with the rocking of the carriage, an undersong that would never become a nocturne. The unmoving air, whiffs of stale luggage and stubbed out cigarettes. How sad the telephone wires stretching away absent-mindedly. Chair, a hard green, a neighbor's open mouth breathing, the relic of a newspaper splayed on the floor, shoes off, there a lake suddenly and then gone, now some trees. If it comes to that, I suppose I could dim the overhead and close my eyes, returning to this ruined city that I love, flitting over parapets and rooftops, then alighting to gaze through a window, a man at his desk, fist on a sheaf of paperweight of blood and bone, rapture, grief.
Okay, I'll pass on that train ride. I'm good. Oh boy, yeah, this is what happens when you live in Seattle. You get all these scary train rides. No, it's good. No, it's very, yeah, I commuted to New York City for, about 7 or 8 years on Jersey Transit. When you ride the train every day, you just feel like I mean, sometimes we hit something, it would sit on the track for 50 minutes. And every day the journey had a big question mark in front of it.
Well, I think it'd be interesting to find out historically when poetry first had the image of commuters, right? Because it's a very urban thing. Farmers don't have commute, they don't commute. So when did that, in my mind, I'm thinking of the wasteland where he's looking at the crowds going over the Thames and thinks of the dead, right, in Dante.
Yeah.
And so many, I had not thought death had undone so many. So almost like the commute is of the dead souls. It's a brilliant moment in a poem that just turned, I think, 100.
Wow, fantastic. Anything on the less dark side? No, only kidding. You can read whatever you want. It's fantastic. I love it. I love poetry hours. So you could, as long as Victoria doesn't come on again to monitor us, I think we're good.
Well, let's see. So I guess this is a kind of a dark poem too. It's a poem that some readers like. It's called "A Crack in the Amphora," and again, John, it's about inquiry, and it's about how when we go to a museum and we look at artifacts. My wife we had just gone to the Burke Museum in Seattle, and she was complaining that they have these beautiful artifacts, but they're sort of hodgepodge collection, and she wanted a deeper dive into one kind of tribal history, and didn't get it. And so this idea that we are kind of passive lookers on, and kind of absorbing the art for its beauty, but often without any knowledge again of that ideology. How did it arise? What is its origin? We read the little placard, but that's hardly sufficient. And an amphora is a jar that the Greeks had to hold oil. And so this poem is called "A Crack in the Amphora." And it's really, if you could follow that crack to what caused it, right? That's what the poem's modus vivendi is. A crack in the amphora. If you can squeeze your eyes through, past the dry outer world of painted clay, you'll find a corridor leading away from light, away from museum hum, to the interior a sculptor's palm knew as wet before any votive oil splashed in. Then follow the crack to its dim source, a star fracture made millennia back when a pensive slave wholly lost track of his steps, dreaming of his son home from war, dreaming of his own course that ill-starred day he'd gone off alone to gather in his flock before the snows, forgetting, as he once more felt the chill of seeing crested horsemen on that hill, to watch a low lintel. Follow his gaze as he picks himself up and then grows pale, seeing a break in the earthen glaze, a wound soon to be mirrored on skin when the masters come to claim his own. The jar's provenance is thereby known only to those who journey to the core of darkness that lies unbroken within. Come, touch the cold pressed dark and pour.
Ah, beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, really nice, really nice. Yeah, no, you make a good point. The origin story, the story behind the story, really nice, very nice.
the origin, I'm rereading Joyce's Ulysses, and there's that great chapter where it's a question and it's in the form of a Catholic catechism of a question and an answer, which is, a way of heuristically organizing education. And actually, Elizabeth Bishop has a fragment of a kind of a catechistic thing in geography as an epigraph. I think it's in Geography 3, where so what is a continent, and that's the answer. What is this, and the answer. Anyway, in this penultimate chapter in Ulysses, it's this great dramatic meeting of Stephen Daedalus and Leopold Bloom. And it's all under the aegis of this abstract voice looking down and asking a question, getting an answer. And I love that chapter because it begins very scientifically with an incredible, abstract, cold, astral diction, and ends or veers ineluctably towards the poetic. And it's just gorgeous. And I'm not sure why I'm bringing this up. I don't know what started this theme, but I thought I'd like to read one section of that as an example of really how prose can be so beautifully poetic. We can't read this without kind of awe, right? So the astral image is asking, what did these two do in the kitchen, right? So what did Bloom see on the range? And then the answer, what did Bloom do at the range? He's actually boiling water, right? And then, so the answer is, he opens up the faucet to fill up the teapot, right? And then the question is, did it flow? Did the water flow, right? Yes, from Roundwood Reservoir in County Wicklow of a cubic capacity of 2.4 million gallons percolating through a subterranean aqueduct of filters. And it goes on and on and on, almost like it could never end because you're tracing this water flow all the way, where, the rain, and where did the rain come from, and so on and so forth. This kind of never ending thing. But this, this question, what in water did Bloom, water lover, drawer of water, water carrier, returning to the range, admire, right? And I'll just read you just a couple of lines, they're so fun. Its universality, its democratic equality and consistency in nature, in seeking its own level, its vastness in the ocean of Mercator projection, its unplumbed profundity in the Sundean trench of the Pacific, exceeding 8,000 fathoms. It goes on and on and on for a very long time, but it ends like this. Its metamorphoses as vapor, mist, cloud, rain, sleet, snow, hail, its strength in rigid hydrants, its variety of forms in lows and bays and gulfs and bites and guts and lagoons and atolls and archipelagos and sounds and fjords and minches and tidal estuaries and arms of sea. And it's just incredibly beautiful. And it ends with its ubiquity is constituting 90% of the human body, the noxiousness of its effluvia and lacustrine marshes, pestilential fens, faded flower water, stagnant pools in the wandering moon. No poet has ever written any better. Which gets us back to the way in which, all of that chapter is written as a question and answer, as an inquiry. Where would the inquiry cease if we just kept asking these questions? Where does it get us? And this culture of ours is, increasingly technologically oriented. So the answer is, getting back, John, to your idea of data, Joyce begins with a series of data right? It's here, it's there, it's
Yeah.
flowing at this rate, it's going to fill this reservoir, this cubic feet and so on, but it ends up in this mythopoetic language. And I'm not sure where the, Zeno's arrow will take us with that, as we technologically evolve, maybe we end with myth. 2001: A Space Odyssey, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of sci-fi stuff that we could end up with, and I don't know. Seems to be coming to our neighborhood, not our neighborhood theater, just to our neighborhood soon. Let's take another. We've got about 8 minutes left, so Teresa or Kathy, if you have any questions or comments.
I do.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm sorry. I just figured out what was wrong with my camera today here on the video. I just wanted to say, Brian, I've picked up on a few things that you said that really hit home. One of them was the forgetting. I know I'm not responding to what you just read last. I find that quite a bit myself, searching for words and so forth, and had one of those major birthdays last summer. So I appreciate whenever anyone mentions that about searching for the word, especially when people are way younger than 60, 65, and 70. So I appreciated that.
But what are you saying? Do you think
to,
that I'm way younger? I'm not. I'm right in that ballpark.
oh. Well, the other thing I wanted to ask you about was early in the program, you mentioned that you read something like this. You read a certain poet for about a month, and I take it, delve into it. Is that a writing style for you, or is that just now in retirement you have more time for that, or is that something you've always done?
Yeah, no, it's the retirement part, where my time used to be taken up with a lot. I was an English teacher, and there's a lot of grading of papers and commenting, and that takes a lot of time. So most of my weekends were spent doing that, and a lot of my energy was spent in teaching, which is very, it's highly rewarding. But when I stopped teaching, and it was also contemporaneous with the advent of the plague, I had suddenly not only time on my hands, but also a very narrow room. So what better to do than to binge watch and also to binge read. I'd like to address your question about forgetting with actually the title poem of my second book, which is called Remembering Lethe. And Lethe, if you recall, in mythology, was the river in Greek ideas of the afterlife that allowed the transmigration of souls as they drank of the river. They died, they went down there, they drank of the river, and then that erased their memories of their prior life so that they could reascend and start anew. So it's a cycle, but unlike the Nietzschean cycle of recalling everything, you blessedly forget. But unfortunately, what happens when you're alive and you start to have that Lethe experience, right? So this is about my mom's dementia. That's a long-winded explanation or setup of the poem, and how really disturbing that is for a child to see a parent who at one point knew all the answers and then is unable even to recognize that you're there. And I would have this experience of going from Seattle to New York to visit my mom in a nursing home, and she would be, not only, well, she began by being thrilled that I was there, but forgetting that I was there the next day, to not even knowing who I was. So this is, I'll end the reading with this title poem. Yesterday, a friend wrote, "So many of your poems are about ancient facts, names. I don't know those references, but nonetheless, I think what you do admirable. Not to be understood is admirable if seen in a certain light, a way of keeping up one's old illusions. Hardly what my teenage self had sought to wrap mind around during lectures on the Greek nude, when slides taught me to embrace new embodiments of grace and see why, expressionless and wooden, the Critios boy is beautiful. How was I to know that those deep images from my school days would be so crucial decades on? How, before I'd ever climbed Delphi's crags, a vision of Delphi was to capture me so wholly I could almost taste the fumes that wound from the sacred fissure at whose lip the priestess knelt to suck in the upwelling god. My son once asked the name of that river in Hades, said to make the newly dead lose memory. Lethe? Lethe, I think. In her last year, my mother gazed at me and saw no son but her former husband. James, come up here. She motioned to the bed she lay on, and I answered with a stricken no. No, she said, I want you up here. I don't know why the scene fades, an unbridgeable gulf. And what did we do afterwards? Probably a wheelchair outing to the home's garden, where she smiled at roses with a look of one who had once known names for this, sinking into sleep. Did she understand she'd stay in that place? Or how finally a phone would waken her sons with wished for, dreaded news, leading to a dawn flight toward frayed robes, unworn slippers? Well, we would all be better for a dip in Lethe water to ward off the cold when the cold comes. In a file, I've kept my son's crayon drawing of the souls gathered by the riverside. Their ferrymen just a brown scribble bobbing next to stick figures on the bank, ready for their mythic entrance in some long ago show and tell. If I touch her absence now, it's in stories I almost hear. As falling asleep, I dream of riverbeds, weeds, thrust and catch at the hem of memory, a cloak unraveling, unspooled. Here, Mother, take my hand again the way you used to on our way to wherever we were headed, when I would look up at you wordlessly in tongue-tied love. And you were so young too, and childhoods we shared, mine in your keeping, and yours as we settled on the bed, your warming voice joining ears, when I was just your age, making us almost playmates together, though finally you would have to stand up to re-enter your world, leaving me on the riverbank, child no more, seeing your shadow cross into light.
Woo. Wow, what an ending. Brian, we are at the end of our show. Unfortunately.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really
it's been fantastic. I feel like part history, part English. We had the Cliff's Note of Ulysses. No, it's no, I think it's been great. I think part of it is you hit on so many different areas and shared so much with us. We didn't get any Carolyn Forche stuff. Maybe we have to have a redo, and we'll dip you in the river and have you come back.
That's a scary notion, but
that's a scary notion. Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question? Just the Amphora poem, is it published somewhere?
Yeah, it's published in the magazine called Literary Imagination, and it's also in this book, which is the second book, Remembering Lethe.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So Brian, thanks again, and we'll stay in touch and we'll get you the recording.
Thank you. And this has been a lot of fun, really.
Oh, no, it's great. You kidding? This is, Teresa knows this is my top hour of the week. This is it. Out of how many hours in the week? This is the number 1 hour. So fantastic.
thank
No,
you.
thank you for all your preparation and delivery. Great stuff. Okay, Teresa.
Just real quick, I wanted to say, Brian, that my
Oh.
father had dementia. So I appreciate that the last poem you read a great deal. Really hit home. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I was talking to Teresa number 2. The other Teresa at the library. That's good. Good. We had both Teresas. Brian, very good. We're going to end it out and I'll be in touch. Thank you again.
Okay. Thanks, John.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.